Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
Welcome to Good Sex at NYU with Tawny Lara. I am Danielle Elliman, the Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at the Student Health Center. I provide a lot of services for people who have experienced sexual and relationship harm. And also we do some prevention work as well. And Jane Bowman is my co-host today, and she works at our Student Health Center's Wellbeing office. She's been at NYU for a number of years. She's amazing. She does a lot of work around education and prevention and outreach. So she's here to help join the conversation. But we're here today to talk to Tawny Lara. We're excited that you're here. Tawny is an author, journalist who wrote the book Dry Humping, which is described by Goodreads as a judgment-free handbook that shows you how to replace liquid courage with real courage at every stage of the dating game, ultimately building stronger sexual and romantic relationships. Her writing has also been featured in the Huffington Post, Men's Health, Playboy, just to name a few. Additionally, she is the co-author of the Sobriety Deck, co-host of the Recovery Rocks podcast, and co-founder of the NA Botanical Spirits. She teaches virtual courses on writing, publishing, media strategy, and DIY PR. Thank you so much for joining us, Tawny.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So just a brief little activation warning here. The conversation is about sex, dating, and sober living. The conversation is really meant to be positive. We're going to ask some questions, but we're also going to open it up towards the end for any questions that you all might have. But please take care of yourself. This can be activating for some folks. And so if anything comes up for you, feel free to, get up, take care of yourself. Also, if you need to, you can call our Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999, or you can chat with them through their mobile app. If you're not part of NYU community, you can also reach out to Safe Horizons at 1-800-621-4673 or 988 for mental health services. So with that, we're going to get started with some questions.
Woo!
Thanks, Danielle. So, Tawny, can you share a bit about the journey that made you want to write this book?
Absolutely. As corny as this sounds, this is the book that I needed when I was newly sober. This is the book I needed when I was still drinking very heavily. When I quit drinking, the thought of dating, let alone having sex without alcohol, just really scared me. I had no idea how. For my whole, adult life, I had always linked alcohol with sex. So when I quit drinking, it just felt it didn't feel like I was starting over. I actually was starting over. I had to learn how to date all over again. I had to learn what I wanted out of a sexual experience, and all of the things that I go into in the book. But it really is the guide that I needed.
We're very glad you wrote it. And were there moments in your early sober dating journey that almost made you return to drinking? If so, how did you get through them?
There were definitely moments where I was, on a date, I was offered alcohol. Even if the person knew that I wasn't drinking or that I was sober, they would still offer me drinks. And I was like, one guy literally was offered me like a vodka tonic. And I was like, no, I'm sober. And he's like, you don't even drink vodka? And I was like, no, I don't drink alcohol. But so there's moments like that where it's like you have to, I had to remember why I stopped drinking. And, in chapter 1 of my book, I say the importance of dating yourself, figuring out who you are before you put yourself out there. can only help your dating and sexual experiences.
I love that. Dating yourself, I think, is so important. Really getting to know who you are, what you like, and what your body likes, what, all sorts of dating yourself, not just like going out on, dates, but also getting to know your body.
100%.
Can you tell us some of the fun dates that you took yourself on? What are some of the things that you might recommend to others to do to date yourself?
Well, I learned when you stop drinking or even reevaluate your relationship with alcohol, you have a lot more time on your hands and you have more money because alcohol is really expensive. So I started ticking off these items on my list. Like, I'm going to do these things one day. So I knew I wanted to write a book. So I started taking writing classes. I knew I wanted to study Spanish. So I started, studying Spanish and just doing all these things I said I was going to do one day. And looking back on it, that was really the chapter that I was dating myself. I didn't call it that at the time, of course, but also, volunteering and just getting out of my head and giving back to the community. And then, that's more of the intellectual side. And then on the physical side, just getting to know my body without alcohol, figuring out what I like, what feels good to me, as opposed to what society has conditioned me to think that I should like, and really separating those two. And I'm nearly 10 years alcohol free, and I'm still unpacking these things. So I share that to say, this is a long journey. It's not you don't do dry January and figure all this stuff out.
Yeah.
It's a journey that I don't think it ends, but yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about finding intrinsic courage instead of liquid courage. Can you tell us a little bit about how that journey began, and were there any moments where it was more difficult, within sort of transitioning into more of the intrinsic courage versus the liquid courage?
Yeah. So when I first quit drinking, the thought of dating, let alone having sex without booze, scared me. It was that liquid courage angle. I realized that I thought I needed alcohol to feel confident. I thought I needed alcohol as, that social lubricant. I thought, I had this long list of things that I thought alcohol was doing for me that I put that was good things. But once I stopped drinking and, like I said, learned more about myself, both physically and intellectually, I learned that I actually feel more confident when I feel smart, when I go on a date, or when I was having sex with someone for the first time, actually advocating for my own pleasure and having confidence to do that. And I didn't know how to do that when I was drinking. I was a people pleaser. I was relying on liquid courage. And then I stopped drinking and really figured out who I am and what I want. And then learned the boundaries element, learned how to communicate those boundaries. Again, this is all a journey. It takes a while. It is kind of like learning a new language,
Yeah.
But for me, I think I coined that term intrinsic courage, of just replacing liquid courage with real confidence, with that, because liquid courage is essentially BS. It's a facade. It's really just activating this confidence that's already in you, or activating this desire that's already in you, but for some reason you don't have the confidence to act on it. And I had to find that intrinsic courage to get there.
And how would you say you found that? Is it through dating yourself? Were there other things that you did to find that?
Yeah, dating myself, advocating for myself. Every time that I stood up for myself on a date or in a sexual experience, I felt more confident. Every time I was able to have a conversation on a date without ordering a drink, I felt more confident. So it builds, and I'm still building it.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk a lot about boundaries and communication, and I do that a lot on our podcast as well. And so I'm wondering if you can just share more about some of the early messages that you received around boundaries and communication that might have been helpful and maybe even harmful, that maybe contributed to why you were needing that liquid courage.
Well, I didn't know what boundaries were. So it's I don't even know that I was receiving messages.
Yeah.
It was more this societal expectation of what me as a woman is supposed to do, and not necessarily what I want to do on a date or in the bedroom or whatever. I wasn't taught how to have boundaries or communicate. No one taught me that. So, there's the societal expectations, there's the pop culture of, liquid courage is everywhere. It's on like every movie, every TV show. It's ubiquitous. And so, subconsciously, that's where I learned. That's where I learned boundaries. That's where I learned communication. And, like I mentioned in my book, like, growing up on Sex and the City, I was like, that's what you do. Like the girls go out, they have drinks, and then they go on dates. And it's like and I was like, if Carrie Bradshaw, the ultimate sexpert, needed alcohol to have a good time in bed, then like, what the hell are we supposed to do? And so I really had to, that's another thing, I really had to separate.
Yeah.
So getting a little bit more into boundaries, many people fear rejection or awkwardness when trying to set those boundaries. So just to dig a little deeper, how can sober daters learn to embrace the pause, in quotes, and communicate honestly, even when it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar?
Well, you can start advocating for boundaries with friends, with family. Not advocating for boundaries is usually a sign of people pleasing. And, if that's showing up on dates, it's probably showing up in other relationships too. So you could just tell a friend like, hey, I'm actually trying to set boundaries. I'm learning what boundaries are. I'm reading this book about boundaries. Do you want to read it with me? Can we have like a role play conversation? Just, practicing it on someone that you feel comfortable with. That could be super helpful. And then when you're actually on a date, you will feel a little bit more confident because you've done a few trials. And I think just understand that it can be awkward and just kind of lean into that. Like I said, I had no idea how to communicate at all. So communicating was really awkward. I stumbled. I stumbled over my words. I didn't know what I was saying, but I knew I was advocating for myself. And even though the words didn't come out the way I wanted them to, the message was still delivered. And it is kind of like a muscle. You keep flexing it, you get stronger. And I think, in life, I think it's just important to remember that rejection is just part of life. My book received dozens and dozens and dozens of rejections. I got one yes. So, it's just part of life. And I think the sooner you can embrace rejection, then it sounds really corny, you could just have a better life.
Well, the one yes was
you just need one
fortuitous,
yes.
right? So that worked out.
Well, I do think it's really important what you're talking about is that, you need to practice in smaller risk environments, right? And so it's like, let's practice with our friends. I often tell a lot of the clients that I work with that, it's helpful to start there. And also, if you're dating, to set those boundaries early on in the situation, like if you're on a dating app, what are my boundaries? What's, and if someone's trying to push that boundary right away, like how can we be firm in those early moments, right? Because it gets more complicated the more invested we get, right? So it's like how to set those earlier on in that process. So I think that's really important.
Exactly. And I'll share 2 book recommendations that help me set boundaries. One is The Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. And the other is Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab.
I have that one in my office.
She has a card deck too. She's the boundaries queen.
She's got she's so quizzes in there.
Yes. Their work was super helpful for me.
Yeah, I recommend that one as well. And so one of the other things that comes up a lot, I think, with relationships is having conflict. I think there's such a stigma around we shouldn't have conflict, or if we do, what does that look like? And oftentimes conflict comes up around substance use, whether it's someone who's already intoxicated or if that's how you normally are having those fights, but also when maybe 2 people are in different places in their sobriety journey, right? That can also be difficult. So I'm wondering, how do couples navigate that from your perspective, or how did you navigate that when it comes to having healthy conflict in a booze-free way? Because that can be really scary. It's trauma-inducing at times. And so it's a lot to kind of process. I'm wondering what your advice is there.
Yeah. No, my husband's looking at me like, what's she going to say about healthy conflict? There's a chapter in my book about the importance of fighting. Like you just said, we're told that fighting is bad. If you a real relationship doesn't need, you wouldn't fight if it was true love. No, if you're not fighting, then someone's a people pleaser or both of you, or no one wants to rock the boat, that means there's a lack of communication. And if you're not communicating, then it does blow up into fights. Where if you can just say like, hey, when you blank, I feel blank, that's a really solid template to use when communicating. And when you can have more conversations like that, you're actually going to have less fights, because fights happen when it's usually like blowing up, right? But like, and sometimes you do need to have these conflicts that is part of some communication. But if you can just start with, again, advocating for boundaries, communicating how you're experiencing someone, then you will have less fights. But again, you have to be in a relationship with someone who feels that way too. You can't do all of the work. You can't be the only one communicating. You can't set boundaries and then have someone stomp all over them. You have to have a partner that wants to have that healthy communication with you. And it's hard to find. Yeah. It's really hard to find. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd also just add to that emotion regulation is also really important when it comes to that, because if you are activated because of trauma, like so many people have experiences with having conflict in their home growing up, and not necessarily bad. It's just like we have experiences. And so we bring those into our relationships. And so we need to take that breath or take a walk around the block. We need to normalize our experience, name our experience. And then be able to come back into the space with a different perspective. And so if you have alcohol or a substance involved, that's much more complicated. Like you're not being able to be honest with yourself, and you can't regulate your emotions. You can't do so much if you're under the influence of something.
You don't even know your emotions when you're intoxicated. Everything is heightened. You might be blacked out. I mean, there's substances just hinder everything. And I'm not anti-alcohol. I want to say I'm not anti at all. It didn't work for me, but I think it's important to say, an advocate for harm reduction. And, if you can drink alcohol and it doesn't change your personality, that's great. I think that's something to really, I commend that. I never knew how to do that. Yeah. It's really complex. It's really complex, and you just have to keep exploring it and advocate for yourself along the way.
Yeah. Another thing that sometimes changes us when it comes to alcohol or substances is like when we are in the bedroom, right? And so I think sometimes we're talking about liquid courage, but it's also, how do we have sex? I think you talk about in the book a little bit about some of the science behind having sober sex and the differences like physically. Can you share a little bit more about like the physical differences that you experienced or researched from your book?
Yeah. I mean, so alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. So that means that it's like you're literally not feeling as much as you could be and everyone's body is different. Sometimes it's one drink, sometimes it's a couple or, 10. But you are actually doing your body a disservice by combining alcohol and sex, because you are not feeling maximum pleasure. So, and on that note, excessive alcohol use can lead to erectile dysfunction. It can lead to vaginal dryness, dry mouth, all three pretty important parts to a sexual experience, I would say. So something to keep in mind whenever someone says, drunk sex is better. What are you talking about? So I'm like, why is drunk sex better? I ask that question. Why do you think drunk sex is better? And people usually say, I feel more confident. I feel less inhibitions. And so, I'm a journalist, so I'm going to ask like 100 questions. And it's very annoying. But I'm like, well, why do you think you need to get rid of those inhibitions? We need inhibitions. Yeah. Inhibitions actually keep us safe. So I think that's really important to remember as well.
Yeah, I think social workers and journalists are very like, siblings or something, because
very much.
We also ask a lot of questions in those moments. Yeah. So there are a lot of beliefs about sex and sobriety. Can you share more about, what you experience when it comes to maybe institutional or interpersonal internalized messages from your journey in life that made you want to fake an orgasm? Because in your book, you talk a little bit about the pressures of like faking orgasms. And I find that really interesting because one of the things that came up for me when you're reading your book was really around what influenced me to want to fake an orgasm. And I remember this is like my generation. But when Harry met Sally, where she's like, like, what is that? I'd never heard or thought about that before, and so I'm like, oh, does everyone have to like fake this? And so I'm wondering if you have influence, like what kind of influenced you to think that you needed to fake that?
Porn, for sure. Yeah. Period. Porn.
Okay, that was it. Moving on to the next question.
No, I mean, it's just sex scenes in general in film is, I'm going to get graphic for a sec. Like when you see sex on TV or film, as soon as a penis enters a vagina, the woman is climaxing. And I'm like, that's not how it is. So and that's just on like regular TV or movies. And then, in porn, it's way heightened. So, it's these things that we don't realize are really like these subliminal messages, these subconscious messages that condition us to think that we are supposed to do that. Especially if you don't have access to sex education, you think that's what sex is. And so it's just so important to, like, there's a reason I put that in my book. Like, I used to fake orgasms. And as soon as I quit drinking, the first time I had sober sex, I realized I like had this dialogue in my head. I was like, wait, I don't think you want to do this. I don't think you want to fake this. And I shared that out loud. I was like, hey, I normally fake orgasms, but I don't want to do that with you. And he was like, cool. So I was not expecting those two things to be connected. But I think for me, when you get sober or you just reevaluate your relationship with substances in general, you have to be really honest with yourself. It's a very like humbling experience. So just faking orgasms is lying. And it was just crystal clear to me just instantly like, oh, this is a lie. This is a performance. I don't want to lie or perform. That's not why I'm having this sexual experience. But again, that I took time to figure out what I wanted out of a sexual experience. I never did that before. I just did what I thought I was supposed to do.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think one of the things that I talk a lot about is that, porn is a script. Like there's consent. There's like all these things that they're like practicing and they get to reshoot. And I think we need to make sure that like these generations that are watching it and getting all their sex ed really sort of critically evaluate that this isn't always accurate. We need to check in because oftentimes people will bring in things like choking someone or like, and this is like normalized because of porn.
It's very normal now.
Yeah.
Choking and anal are very, it's very 2025. You heard it here first.
But in reality, it's like we need to be able to have these conversations. And I think part of the challenge is that we're not talking about sex earlier on in the process because of stigma, because of a lot of the things that we are told in our media or in our families and our culture.
We're not told.
Yeah.
It's just if you're taught that sex is bad, especially, if you're queer, if you're taught that you're wrong for having these sexual desires, there's so much internalized that it just takes a lot to unpack.
Yeah, or if there's a right or a wrong way to be having it, or that, sex is all about the orgasm.
Yes.
It's not.
No.
There's a lot of pleasure that can be had without an orgasm.
Absolutely.
There's lots of things that even just the definition of sex, I could just keep going on and on. Sorry, I can go off on a little tangent there. But I just wanted to like highlight that I think that's so important.
But that's the point of like when I stopped faking orgasms, I found pleasure in sex. It makes sense now, but I stopped performing and I started doing what I wanted to do. And I'm still figuring all of that out. It's when you do something one way for so long, you don't just change overnight. I had sex this way for 15 years, So it's like, it takes a long time to unlearn that and then learn what I actually want.
And then your body goes and like starts changing and then you got to figure it all out again.
All of it.
Can you talk a little bit about how your sober journey intersected with your development of your sexual orientation and just how that has all played out for you?
Yeah. So I came out as bisexual in my early 30s when I was newly sober, but looking back, I was always bisexual. I just didn't feel bi enough to take pride in that term. Another thing about the societal stigma and lack of representation of bisexuality that I internalized. But getting sober gave me a chance to, like, that was part of dating myself. I studied bisexuality. I learned what it was as opposed to what people told me it was. So that gave me the confidence to be really proud of my sexuality. And I made a strong effort to include as many queer voices in my book as possible because there is I'm very passionate about the intersection of substance use and queerness, especially at the gay bar. You know, where you turn 18, it's this rite of passage. You get X's on your hand, you go and you dance and you feel liberated because you find your people, and it's really empowering. And then you're handed drugs and alcohol, and then, your gender identity and your sexuality are tied to these substances. And several of the people I interviewed realized that, when they quit drinking, they're like, wait, I'm trans. I was drinking because I was unhappy with my gender identity, or I didn't feel all these reasons. And I also interviewed people who are asexual who realized, you know what? I stopped drinking and I realized I don't like sex. And I think that is also sexual liberation, realizing you don't have to be this really sexual person. You might actually be asexual, and that's okay too. And that is part of the queer community, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it feels like really performative, right? Like we're trying to perform what everyone else is expecting. It's some of those ideologically oppressive beliefs that says like there's one way that's going to make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to perform it, and when we can't, then maybe we use substances as a way to sort of help us to perform.
Yeah, feel normal and fit in, and your friends are having these sexual experiences, and then you want to fit in, so you have these sexual experiences, so you have the stories to talk about them, and then you realize, wow, I've been performing whatever it was, whether it's faking orgasms or being queer or whatever it is. It's it really. For me, it was getting sober was a huge self-discovery. And I don't think you have to quit drinking to have, the epiphanies that I had. But, I hope that you can take from this conversation, this is all the information, again, that I needed when I was newly sober and still drinking.
Yeah.
From a risk reduction perspective, do you have advice about how entities like student health centers, for example, can support students who are navigating sober sex, their own curiosity, or pursuing recovery without shame?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of risk reduction, harm reduction, which just means like if you're going to drink, be safe. If you're going to use drugs, be safe. And I think that form of sex education, that approach to sex conversation can be such a game changer. So just knowing that the school that you're going to stands for your safety, for your sexual health is amazing. I didn't have that. I grew up in Texas and I had abstinence-only sex education. I'm very lucky that I, was raised by my mom who taught me about all of the things, but it was very weird. I had this feminist mom who raised me in Waco, Texas. So it's like, she was telling me one thing and then I'd go to school and be told the totally opposite thing. So I think it's so great that NYU has programs like this. And just, maybe it's the journalist in me, but I think just asking questions of if the students are coming to you, just asking questions like, what if you think drunk sex is better? Why? Ask them why. It's usually a confidence thing. Like 99% of the time, it's a confidence thing. So, and then that's the actual issue at hand. And then catching it before it becomes alcoholism or a full-blown addiction is I think that's what these services can be used for. We didn't have the word sober curious when I was in college. Non-alcoholic drinks were not a thing. Now they are. So, and we weren't talking about mental health like we are now. So I think just having these conversations is doing so much for the students already.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also connecting hard with your Texas upbringing. I'm a Kansas girl over here, so I see you. I think one of the things that we think about when we think about confidence is also the ability to validate ourselves. And so one of the things I think that comes up with a lot of our students is the ability to validate ourselves through achievement. We have a lot of amazing students who are very high achieving. And so they get a lot of their validation through things like grades or status or winning awards or romantic success. And so in your journey, what did it take for you to kind of shift that from those challenging validations from the outside world to more of that internal validation?
Well, girl, that is something I am still working on. I will also speak to the role that transfer addictions play, because I quit drinking, but then I started talking about it on the internet and got super addicted to social media. And I swapped alcohol for algorithms, which is a whole other conversation. Yeah. But I was no longer needing validation from people I was having sex with because I was getting it from Instagram.
Yeah, the likes.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So now I'm in this second phase of my recovery where I'm I've been off social media for 6 months now. But it feels like a whole other addiction that I'm breaking. It feels like I'm newly sober again. It's it's really jarring. I was super just plugged into everything, checking how many people were looking at my stories and how many likes my post got. And if a post didn't get good likes, then what's wrong with me? And, so now I'm trying to not do any of that. But it's if you have advice on that, I would love that, because I am still learning.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I tend to talk about with my clients, and I do for myself, let's be honest, is a lot of the self-talk, right? I think to be able to say this is normal.
Yeah.
I'm normal. It's okay what I'm experiencing, and I'm not crazy. I'm not whatever. And, even those words have negative connotations to them, but just to say, I feel oftentimes we have this really harmful critic inside of our head, and it's so loud. Mm-hmm. And to be able to let me find what's positive. What is good in my life? What am I grateful for? And to be able to do something well, right? I was telling you I have a volleyball game after this, and I was saying I'm a pretty good volleyball player. And so I do that a couple times a week. I remind myself that I'm good at things. This is what I'm good at, right? And it helps to make me feel good about myself.
Yes.
Right? So whatever you're good at, do that, and then maybe push yourself and outside the box so you can try other things to continue to build yourself. That's why I liked your dating yourself, right? Because you're getting to know yourself. You're here's what I am. Here's the things that I bring to the table, right?
Yeah.
And so that way, if you know what you bring to the world, you know what you bring, you know that you're lovable, right? Because I think that's what some of this is really about, because we fear that rejection.
Yeah.
And so we're I need others to validate me.
Yeah.
And so it's complicated. I think you said, it's a journey for all of us. There's going to be good days and bad days. I'm not having a great skin day. Whew, it'll throw me off.
Your skin looks wonderful.
Thank you. But if you have a bad skin day, it'll throw me
totally throw you off your game.
Yeah, my validation's in the toilet.
Oh yeah. No, I was spotting with the concealer earlier, and then I messed it up, and I was now it looks worse, and it was a whole thing. So
I mean, your skin looks amazing.
Thanks, girl.
I got you.
Okay, I'm going to break up this love fest here. So we were talking about the idea of changing your relationship with social media, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a breakup in a way.
Yes.
So leading into that, we know that breakups can be challenging, and many students may turn to alcohol or other substances to help them cope. So in your opinion, what are some healthier and more mindful ways to try to begin a healing process and move forward?
Yeah, I love this question, because when I was writing my book, I was I can't just sit here and talk about the benefits of sober dating, alcohol-free dating, without acknowledging that relationships also end, and heartache is horrible. Breakups are awful, and breakups are one of the biggest causes of relapse. And so I wanted to have a chapter that really acknowledged breakups. And I kind of had this little ritual ceremony for myself when I quit drinking. It was maybe I was maybe 8 or 9 months sober. And I did a photo shoot with my bottle of Jack Daniels. And I was like, I had a photographer like photograph me pouring it out. Like I made it like this thing. It was really symbolic for me. And, you know, I don't think you have to have a photo shoot with your booze. But doing something that is like, I know some people like write a breakup letter to alcohol, like Dear Alcohol, you know, and you don't have to be fully sober to do this. You know, this could be like a sober curious thing or a dry January thing. But just acknowledging the role alcohol played in your life. And it's not all bad. You know, I have a lot of good memories. I had a lot of fun when I drank. That's why I did it for so long. But I think just acknowledging like, okay, this is a chapter of my life that's closing for now. And finding some way to honor that, whether it's, you know, a friend of mine wrote a one-woman show about a breakup that she went through. She was like 4 years sober. She wrote a show called Breakup Content. And it was like about how, you know, social media is, you know, we document our relationships on social media, but we don't document our breakups on social media. We archive the pictures and pretend it never happened. And so she did the opposite. And I thought that was like a really beautiful artistic way to channel that pain and that heartache into something, into art, and just finding some way to honor that.
That's great.
Yeah. When we work with students around habit change, we talk a lot about how it's almost like the substance, let's say it's a substance, becomes personified. Mm-hmm. And it's like changing a relationship with a friend or a romantic partner where you go through this, you know, I love you, the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't ever want to see you again. Yeah. Don't you ever come over here again? How quickly can you get here? And it's just this like roller coaster of emotions. And that if you can think about the substance as almost being a person, and if you have a skill set from changing relationships with humans, that you can apply that somewhat. You can write the letter to the substance. So
write the letter. And, you know, there was a TV show, I think there was only 2 seasons, but it was Single Drunk Female. And there was a really powerful scene where she's nervous about having sober sex for the first time. And her sponsor is like, well, yeah, you've always had a threesome with alcohol. So now you have to figure out how to just be the two of you. And that really like blew my mind, because I was like, yeah, that's what I was doing. It was a threesome with alcohol. I didn't know how to show up just me. And that learning how to do that was, you know, intrinsic courage, right?
That's great. So I'm going to ask one more question, but I also want to put it to the audience. If anyone has any questions, to please write them on your notebook and pass them over to Jenny, who's over to the side here. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We may not have time for all of them, but I want to just ask, what are some of your top tips from Dry Humping and how to have like sober sex and how to do dating in a sober environment?
Well, actually, the longest chapter of my book is booze-free date ideas. And like, spoiler alert, every date is alcohol-free. We just add alcohol to everything. So, you know, I'm a big fan of experiential dates, meaning just some activity. Because if you just get coffee, it's still kind of like getting a drink. You're just sitting at the, you know, at a table, staring at each other, talking about, you know, who you are, where you're from, all these things, which is like, you know, good. But an experiential date, like going to a museum, going roller skating, just going for a walk, you know, you're moving, which is getting rid of those jitters, you know, if dating makes you anxious, getting rid of those jitters can be huge. But you're also bonding over, like, you're really present. You're really present and in the moment. So if you're at a museum, you're looking at the sculpture and you're talking about what you're observing and you're having a conversation about it, that's a really great way to explore that relationship and keep it somewhat without going like really, really deep. Because I know sometimes sober or newly sober people, we have a tendency to like trauma dump on a first date or, you know, and this having an activity can really help you not do that. There's a chart in my book that's like the difference between vulnerability and oversharing, which I think is super important to take a look at when you guys grab one. And then, you know, something that I wish someone told me, like how to have better sex in general is, yes, advocate for your pleasure, but remember that you can stop at any time. Like, you don't owe anyone an orgasm. Just because you started having sex with someone, you can stop any time. If someone's pushing you or making you feel bad because you're not ready to have sex, get out of there. You know, like you don't owe anyone anything. So I'm just sharing that because I wish someone told me that. And that's not a sober sex thing. That's just a sex thing. I think not having substances in your system will help you advocate for yourself in that way.
I agree. I think I was just going to add that it can be really helpful to have an out because sometimes we grow up in an environment where it's not always safe or it doesn't feel safe for the no, right? Yeah. And so hopefully we're with people who are safe to hear no, right? So if you're hearing the no, to check in and be like, okay, we can stop at any point, right? Absolutely. But if you're, again, socialized to believe like, oh, I can't say no, what can be an out? I have to pee, or hey, like I need to like check on something. I know my roommate, or hey, like I need to go, I'm just so parched. I'm just so.
Yeah, just take a break. Sometimes you need to take a break, like especially if there's like a PTSD element in there. Yeah. Take a break. Identify 5 things in the room and really ground yourself. If you find yourself performing, you know, remember why you're there. Ooh, we got a lot of questions.
I know. If I can read them, because I put my glasses on as well. So, okay, there's lots of them. Okay. What has the most surprising thing you discovered about yourself while writing the book? And this is a 2-parter. So what advice would you give someone who recently stopped consuming, but their friend group still is actively drinks? Good question.
What I said earlier about rejection was very much like writing a book is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Writing and publishing, it is so hard to do. There's just so much rejection in it. There's so much, not just rejection, but also just being ignored, which is worse than rejection. So my experience as a journalist and writing book proposals and pitching, it's made me almost impervious to rejection at this point. It's almost like, yeah, cool, whatever. I don't care. I'll just ask someone else then. So that was, I think, my biggest lesson is that rejection is just part of the creative process. And if you can just look at it like that instead of taking it personally, I think that can really help you creatively and just as a person. And when I was talking about dating yourself, of taking classes, volunteering, I met people who had similar interests. And you don't have to necessarily stop being friends with the people that you were partying with. You might have to, but I'm still friends with some people that I drank with. A lot of them I'm not, because they felt it was my sobriety was a personal attack on them. So it's you learn the difference between a friend and a drinking buddy. And it's painful. I'm not going to lie. It's hard. Yeah. But when you are dating yourself and you are exploring new hobbies and activities, it can ease that pain a little bit because you are meeting new people with similar interests.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Is like you don't have to like leave your friends, but to find community who has that same interest, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting benefits and you're getting that from other folks as well. And
just to add, that's what we're trying to do with this collegiate recovery community is help our students connect with each other in terms of finding other people who maybe are, let's say, decentering substances.
Yeah, I like that, decentering substances. Do things IRL.
Yeah. Yes,
like get out of the house, go do something, meet people.
Okay, so this one says, I like the comparison of getting sober to breakups. My divorce felt very similar. I found I actually enjoyed sex now that I can be more vocal about my needs. I hadn't thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. What would good, fun dates that you went on that did not include alcohol, to give listeners like other ideas?
Chapter 6. It's all. Yeah, I mean, I would just, go to a smash room, like a break room. When you go break a bunch of stuff, that is a fun date. Yeah, that's like my husband and I have done that. I've done that with friends. It's a really fun way to bond. Yeah. And also like when you quit drinking, or going through a divorce, a breakup, whatever, you have a lot of anger you need to let out. And women are not taught that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be angry, but you have to have a healthy outlet for it. So, go break some stuff. Go smash dishes somewhere.
Yeah. Axe throwing. I think just re-engage with think about what you used to like to do, right? Prior to the relationship or prior to maybe even the last 10 years, whatever that looks like. I know at various different points, I'm like, okay, I used to really be really creative. How do I reconnect with that creative side of myself? And how can I include someone in that, right? There's lots of go make pottery or go do things that you're interested in. And hopefully you find those same values in the people that you're.
Yes. Well, what were your hobbies as a kid?
Yeah.
It was writing. I was running around with a little composition notebook pretending I was Harriet the Spy. So what were you interested in as a kid? That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Did community play a part in building your courage and encouraging you to keep going on the path that you were on?
Oh, yeah. Community is everything. It's absolutely everything. AA was not part of my story. I actually, I quit drinking in 2015. This is before we had the term sober curious, and there was not a lot of non-alcoholic drink options. So I actually began hosting sober meetups. Because I didn't want to, I went to a few AA meetings and it just wasn't a right fit for me. But I wanted to create the space that I needed. Same reason I wrote the book that I needed. So I cannot say enough about community. And in New York City, there's so much to do here. There is just so much to do. And get off your phone, get out, go do stuff with your friends and make new friends, because you can't do this alone. You can't. Even if it's just sober curiosity, you can't do it alone. You do have to have at least a friend that you can check in with, or an accountability buddy. You need it.
Yeah. I'm going to do something out of the ordinary. Because I think my glasses, I'm going to have you read this last one. Okay. Just because my glasses are making a little weird. So
how can someone as a queer person of color who is working on their sobriety sometimes.
Okay, not just me, maybe.
Still want, I don't know. I really want to answer this question.
I know, me too. Oh, that would be great. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Yes, Gen Z is drinking less. Party drugs are having a moment. It's weird. Sober curiosity is having a moment. Party drugs are having a moment. So I think it's important to acknowledge that they're not drinking as much, but they're still doing some stuff. So the question really is can a sober person have sex with someone who's under the influence? Consent, is that consent really?
Yeah.
That's a really loaded question. And there was actually a chapter in my book that was cut about alcohol and the Me Too movement. And I hope to do something with it someday, because if you look at all of these Me Too stories, it's all alcohol or substances are tied to it. But it's really, I think it's really complicated, and alcohol and consent and substances and consent are really messy. And I don't want someone to say you have to be completely sober to have sex, because you don't. You can consent when you're under the influence, but it can get really tricky if one person's sober and one person's under the influence. I would say communication, as annoying as that answer is. Are you comfortable engaging in these hangouts when they're under the influence? If you're not, then, maybe putting that on your dating profile, on the apps, that you're sober curious. You're not looking for any substance hangs, no party and play, nothing like that. Meth is huge in the queer community. P&P, party and play, is poppers. Yeah. So it's everywhere. And I don't have a solid answer for it, other than it's really complicated and you need to check in with yourself and make sure that you feel safe. What would you guys say?
Yeah, I think something similar is that, you have to know what your boundaries are. is it worth you engaging with the person? And consent is always, complicated. You don't have to be completely sober to give consent, but you also, if you know the person, like have the conversation before. But I know in a lot of like communities, you're having hookups and casual sex. And so it's like, well, you're not able to get to know that person and what they're really wanting when they're sober, right? So, it's definitely complex. And I would encourage you to, seek out some support, right? Like where are those spaces that you can have like community, and where can you find people with those similar values to be able to, again, be in places where you feel more safe and comfortable to have those dialogues. But it is complicated. And hopefully this is one of those spaces where you can have like more community. And there are other places that I'm sure we can get connected. Like there's lots of resources at the Student Health Center. Jane, I don't know if you want to add anything in there as well.
No, but I think that you're kind of touching upon what is this real struggle, which is how do I give myself enough of what I need and what I want, but not have the other person's behavior kind of tip me into, a space that I'm not comfortable in. And I work with students who are trying to change their relationship with nicotine, and we have the conversation about, okay, you also drink and a lot of your cohort drinks. So do you have to make a choice, in terms of your social life for the next few weeks or months, that is it just going to be too hard to be in a bar and not want to, vape or smoke? And if so, then that's kind of what you have to decide for yourself, doesn't have to be forever, but maybe for a period of time, I'm going to need to live my life this way. And you try to negotiate with your friends and say, could we maybe every other Friday we go somewhere else where where alcohol's not, the focus. But it takes a lot of extra energy, right? And part of what we're trying to do when we socialize is relax and be rejuvenated, not have to feel like it's so much work. So it's really a dilemma. But we do have support in the health center as well. We have a program I'll just plug called the SAFE program, which is Substance Abuse Feedback and Evaluation. And it's really a conversation between a student and a clinician, just looking at their relationship with substances and talking through ways that it could maybe be shifted. It's a non-pressurized kind of conversation. So.
Is that part of the risk reduction?
Yeah,
that's amazing that you guys offer that.
Well, there's also groups and things that you can join within the Student Health Center and workshops. So just to sort of name that we want to be part of your journey if that's something that would be helpful. And we also have really great clinicians who can help refer you off campus as well to different communities. That might be a good source of support too. So thank you for that really good question. I really appreciate all of those questions. We're going to have hopefully some time at the end after we finish. So if you have more questions or if your question didn't get answered, you can ask Tawny as she's going to assign some books after this. But I have one more question before we end, and that is what I always end my podcast with. Tawny, what does good sex mean to you?
I decentering orgasms. Yeah, I like your use of decentering. No, not faking, but not realizing that you don't need an orgasm to have a sexual experience. So just being present and having fun and not performing, and
there's pleasure there,
communicating, and just it's like sex should be fun. Y'all, like I'm from Texas, so I say y'all. Sex should be fun at the end of the day, like that's what I mean when I say like figuring out what you want from a sexual experience. If you're not having fun, you're probably not, that's something to think about. That's just something to think about. And decentering orgasms is, I'm so glad that as a society, like the sex blogs and all of those things are talking about that instead of, 10 ways to have a mind-blowing orgasm. It's now like 10 ways to get more in touch with your body. So I think just even those perspective shifts can be huge, especially for women, especially for queer people or anyone who's been told that their sexuality is wrong. Just have fun and don't perform. So unless you want to.
Maybe it's the idea of decentering and or redefining orgasm.
Redefining orgasms. Yes. Just have fun.
Also just defining sex in general, because what does sex even mean? We have this like preconceived notion of what sex is. I have students all the time who are like, oh, it's, some kind of, intercourse. It's like,
That's
no,
just
it doesn't
one
have to be.
kind.
That's just one thing.
That's just one kind. You can actually say, like, you can have sex and just be like, you know what? I actually don't want to have intercourse. I want to do this instead.
Yeah.
And you even if the person wants to have intercourse, you don't have to do it. Again, no, I wish someone told me that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't owe it to anyone.
Yeah.
Just have fun.
Sex can be some naked massages. It can be a whole menu of options.
Mutual masturbation,
all those things.
Yeah.
So fun and laughter and silliness can also be in that space.
And just trying new things. Try new things, and if you like it, cool. If you don't, cool. Laugh when it gets awkward.
Yeah. Lots of sounds and smells that are
sex is awkward. So I think just dating is awkward, sex is awkward.
Embrace the awkward.
Embrace the awkward.
Moral of the story, embrace the awkward.
Well, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Baini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.